We just got through buzzing this beach at Nihao. When we finished that training, I won't go into any more detail. We had 4 months there. We were sent up to San Francisco, Hamilton Field, and that was sometime in November. And we were heading, and we knew we were heading for the Pacific, and we were issued an airplane, B-24M. It was a Ford model plane. There was about 4 factories that made the B-24s. Ford in Willow Run, and I read about the people out there. They joked about the planes they were making, and they said they were making it at Willow Run and Will It Run, and Will the Plane Run. Anyway,
That's not very boosting your morale there.
No. I'm glad I found that out after the war was over. I never knew it then. But at any rate, we were issued that plane. We had to take the plane and go through some gasoline fuel tests to make sure that it would, at cruise, it would burn no more than 150 gallons an hour for engines. And we did that, and we swung the compass. That's another process. They have compasses, and you do that and make sure that the compass is accurate, because everything was electric, and the compass is a magnetic instrument. We didn't know what day we were going to leave, and we couldn't tell our folks at the time. And that was in December. We already got into December, and the weather wasn't right. They wouldn't let us go if the prevailing winds weren't, and I don't know what the requirements were, but if it was a headwind, they would not allow us to go, because it was 2,600 miles to Oahu. And we did it and took off on Christmas Eve, 15 minutes before midnight. And so I always remember, we got the okay to take off. It was that night, clear, I think our plane number was 1947, 947, clear for takeoff, and Merry Christmas. And we took off, flew all at Christmas Day, and that trip, according to my flight log, was just over 13 hours.
Wow.
From San Francisco. Now people complain from Chicago that it takes 8 or 9 hours. But at any rate, we got to Oahu. We landed at John Roberts Field, and it was right near Hickam. First things we saw at Hickam Field, we saw that was in '44, three years after the Japanese attack, and there were still the machine gun marks on the buildings. They left them there, that the Japanese, and I thought that was a good thing that they left them there. And there were stucco buildings, and you could see a line of machine gun holes in the stucco. From there, we gave up. We didn't know that. We thought we were going to fly the plane. We went to the North Island of Kauai, Barking Sands, and then from there we left to go to our destination, which was Saipan, and that was in January, early January of '45. And the first night we got to Japan. We were in Japan. Saipan is located about 1,200 to 1,300 miles south of Tokyo, if you get the map. And it's not far by today's standards. And we were, the first night though, they didn't have any barracks ready for us, and we stayed in this wooden building, and we weren't too happy to build. Said this was an officer's quarters, and it had a peculiar wood odor to it. It came from the wood, and I always remember that. And every time I get up at night, that odor was there. It wasn't a nauseous odor, but it was just something that was there, kind of intense.
Not good.
and not good, and it didn't give you a good feeling. I mean, geez, the Japanese lived here, and now we're in it. But
Just a quick question. I
Go
failed
ahead.
to ask this earlier. How many planes were in your particular squadron or flight group?
when we were, see, we didn't even know, we were assigned to the 30th Bomb Group,
Mm-hmm.
and there were 4 squadrons, and we were in the 27th Squadron of the 30th Bomb Group. Each squadron had about 18 to 20 aircraft assigned to it.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when they put it up for a mission, you would have 12, 14, 15 planes. Never all of them, because they're down for repairs.
Right.
And after that, we were put into Quonset huts, and we're told that we were very, very fortunate because the 27th Squadron, the 30th Bomb Group, had just moved out of tents. They were in tents throughout. The island of Saipan wasn't taken until June of '44.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time, with all the damage done and so on, and then bringing our troops in, and it wasn't just the Air Force troops, our Air Corps, it was the military infantry, and everyone lived in tents. And meanwhile, they started to build from probably sometime in the midsummer. So it was only 3 months later, then they had these Quonset huts, and we were in nice clean quarters, and with a regular canvas cot. And I remember they gave you a couple of blankets, no sheets,
Mm-hmm.
and no pillows, and we used our jacket, our flying jacket. There was a green jacket with a little fuzz lining, and
Right.
you'd fold it up and you'd use that for your pillow. But the food was good, and it was I always remember the smell of baking bread in the early morning when we used to go to mess, and that it was just a captivating, nice scent.
Compared to the inside of the original place you stayed
Yeah,
at. Right.
exactly. But we flew our first mission around mid-January, and we were told that we were going to. Now the first mission was a milk run, where it was just a matter of dropping bombs on Pagan Island, and there were Japanese occupied it and so on. But then our second mission was to Iwo Jima. Now Iwo Jima was about 600 to 650 miles north of Saipan, and that would be somewhere between a 4 to 4.5 hour flight.
Mm-hmm.
And they're easy to say, well, how fast did you go? 165 miles an hour. But the point is, you got to remember, it wasn't single aircraft. You would be taken off as a squadron, and there would be 12 to 14 to 16 aircraft. So you would take off as a squadron. For the most part, we didn't bomb as they did in Europe by groups.
So it wasn't carpet bombing.
Well, it was for a squadron.
It was, okay.
It was for a squadron,
Right.
but it was a bigger carpet for
Right.
a bomb group, because for a bigger bomb group, if you can, you'd have a lead bomb group here of perhaps for a squadron, they say 12, 14 planes.
Right.
Then you'd have another bomb squadron here, another bomb squadron here, another one here. So as you went over the target in Europe, they used to tighten it up because they were being attacked by the fighters and so on. Well, our first mission was just one squadron, and all of I think that before D-Day on Iwo Jima and the day of D-Day when they landed at Iwo Jima, we flew with 2 squadrons, but they were in trail.
Mm-hmm.
The first squadron went over, and then the next squadron, because the island was so small,
Right.
and so on. But and of course it was our first mission, and the island of Iwo Jima is not more than 4 or 5 miles across, and I have the map here,
Which we photographed.
which you
right.
saw, and I'll say about that, we used to call it the stinking pork chop. And if you think about it, if you see a map and you look at Iwo Jima, it's shaped like a pork chop, with Mount Suribachi down at the south end. Generally speaking, the prevailing winds at Iwo, and we would be bombing, when I say prevailing winds, at the bombing altitude would range between 18, 19, 20,000. And sometimes, it wasn't always the same, it would be 18.5 or 18, and that was just to not, I think it was because of the defense measures and protection, because you don't want to be flying at the same height all the time, because the Japanese are shooting at you, and if they know you're always at the same height, make it easier for them. The prevailing winds were from west to east, and on some days they would tell us that the prevailing winds, the jet stream was unknown in those days, and yet and very little was known about the weather. What reason would we have to have? The air travel wasn't that far advanced, and we had some days told that there would be 60, 70, and even close to 80 knot winds west to east. So we're at 18,000 feet, and on one mission we calculated that our ground speed was well over 300 miles an hour.
Because of the winds.
With a wind. And it was fun. We thought, but you couldn't tell, because when you're up at 18,000 or 20,000, you're between 3 and 4 miles above your target.
Right. But now, how does that change its speed? Everything I would assume would have to be recalibrated in terms of doing the bombing. Because
the bombing is done much to the dismay of the bombardiers. Here they say, and they used to be the greatest, ticked off. That's the nice word. They're just ticked off, because they would drop on the lead plane. We had a bomb site,
right,
but that was the technique. You had up in the lead plane, you had an experienced crew and an experienced bombardier, well experienced. So he's the one that does the synchronizing with a bomb site,
right,
and everybody is watching him, and all the bombardiers and the other 12 or 14 planes. And when they see those bombs go, they flip their switch, and the bombs are released. And since there's a spread, and that's still carpet bombing,
right,
only a smaller carpet. We were told on the first, there were two airfields on Iwo Jima, and they were both fighter, small airfields. Don't worry about any fighters, because we've kept them neutralized, and they're pretty well out of it. And what they didn't know, or they didn't tell us, I don't know where the planes came from, but on our first mission, which don't worry about the fighters, we were on the mission. All of a sudden, I hear on one of our guys is starting to say, "Fighters at 2 o'clock," and I saw them, and I looked up, and there they were at 2 o'clock. And they're spitting. You see the wings spitting,
right,
because when they're firing, you see those little sparks or little flashes
right, of
an orange or red light, and on their wingtips, and they're firing at you. And all of a sudden, the realization is that what happened? Where did they come from?
And you didn't have any fighter coverage, or
we didn't have. There was no fighter coverage, and so all of our guns were firing all at once, and we were in it. And all of a sudden your attention is, you can't be watching this. I'm flying formation, and everybody has a job to do, and you can't. But I remember just seeing those first fighters coming in on you. What happened to our nose gunner, who was a young man, Bob McFarland from Texas, his nose turret jammed, and he couldn't fire it, nor could he move it. and just jammed. That's probably the worst place when you're being attacked to have something like that happen. You'd have to get into that nose turret, and I've ridden in every single turret, so I know what it's like, including the ball turret. And you get up into that turret, you cannot see your plane. Because yes, if you turn your turret, you can see your own plane, but it's like you're suspended out in the air. The whole world is in front of you, and there's nothing. And when you're under attack, it's a terrible place to be, because it appears like everyone is shooting at you.
I shouldn't be laughing at that, but I can imagine what it's like.
That's the way it appears. And I've gotten into the turrets in the Collings Foundation, and we won't go into that, but they come here and I've gotten into that nose turret, and I always remember that, how my first experience, I said, what a terrible place to be. And especially when you're being shot at. He started to call, he wanted to have us remove him from there, get him out of there. And I'm coming back, and I said, I got on the phone, and I got on the intercom and told him in no uncertain terms, keep quiet, we've got a job to do, we've got to have the intercom open to have our other crewmen announce where the fighters are coming from. So sit there, we'll get you out after we're through this. And it all quieted down, but he never got over that. It was on the first mission, and I think there was no doubt in my mind that he was scared, good time, and he had reason to be. But at the time, something had to tell him, I told him he had to keep quiet, and we weren't going to get to him until it was all over. And it did come. They dropped phosphorus bombs on us, and phosphorus bombs were more of a scare tactic, although if it hit the plane, it could do damage to the plane, not as an explosive. A phosphorus bomb would explode, and it'd be an orange explosion, and then these huge tentacles, it looked like an octopus in the sky, and a white octopus with all these tentacles of smoke going out, and it was more scary than anything else, because you thought you're going to go through it, or you're going to be hit with it. And so for the first mission, to have all that happen within a short period of time, it kind of took your attention.
Right, I can imagine.
And I have to look at the date on the first mission, but our planes were being hit up there by the Ack. We were never hit. We only had 6 missions after the first mission. I had a total of 7 missions, and each one was different in the sense that I said we were bombing from 18,000. It wasn't always the same type of bombs. I showed you earlier, and I have it here. Maybe I ought to show you the picture of our crew. This is our crew of 10 men, and I don't know what they'd be coming out. And I just show myself is right there as pilot. Paul Brownlee from the little town in Kansas of, I'll come to me later. Bill Burke he came from Ohio. Marvin Levin from California. Then we have our top turret gunner was that's the top turret gunner. He's from down in Clinton, Mississippi. Our radio operator, Bob Burns. This was the nose gunner, Bob McFarland. The tail gunner, Al Allen, and our Sperry Ball, Frank Lawrence. Still alive are 4 of us, myself, the bombardier, the top turret gunner, Ray Berry, and Frank Lawrence from up in Portland, Maine. We had a reunion, well, now I'm getting ahead of myself, when one of the missions that we took, there's a shot I want to show.
Well, I'll actually be able, I'm going to get those pictures for the file for us.
All right, I just wanted to show this one because of I know I'm taking valuable time, but this, one of the missions on February 2nd, this picture appeared in a book that I bought up in the Boston bookstore. I couldn't believe that was a mission that we were on, and if you look at the bombs, they were 55-gallon oil drums loaded with napalm, and there was 8 of them on each aircraft. And I flew this particular plane, Vera Lynn, and one of the missions. We were never assigned the same plane. We didn't name our own plane. That was early during the war, and there was a lot of nostalgia to that. So we flew a couple of planes, 1 or 2 twice, but on this particular day, these were, as I say, 55-gallon drums and loaded with napalm, and there were 8 of those, and we were to burn out a whole area on Iwo Jima. And our intelligence, I'm talking about our intelligence outfit, did not tell us, they didn't know. The Japanese were underground.
Mm-hmm.
That was used pre-war as a mine. They were mining sulfur from it, and there were 16 miles of tunnels because of the sulfur operation. It wasn't for defense, but they used them for defense, and that's why the 21,000 Japanese that were on that, we didn't know how many, but at any rate, our Marines ended up killing 20,000 of them. A little around 1,000 were taken prisoner, but we suffered more casualties than the Japanese on that on D-Day, on that effort. On another bombing occasion, we used a 265-pound bomb, and I'm having a senior moment because it had a radio fused bomb on it, and so that it would explode at a certain height, like 50 feet above the ground, and it would do a pattern of damage when you have 12 or 14 planes. Mm-hmm. And if there was any personnel there, they're bound to get pieces of shrapnel that bound the 260. And I think we dropped 8 of those. Mm-hmm. No, there's 2, 4. No, it would be more than 8, probably 12 or 14. And each time the pictures were taken, the only thing that we knew from headquarters, our squadron headquarters, was that we always hit the target. Now, I don't think they'd tell us that if it wasn't mm-hmm. so. However, when I read about how we took Iwo Jima and where the Japanese were, I wonder about the real damage that we really did, because if you were dropping bombs, it would seem like we would have to be able to drop the bombs down the opening of a cave or a hole in the ground, because they were burrowed in there and then went on. So we kept on flying those missions until we were at number 7. Number 6 and number 7 were the two. Number 6 was February 17th, 2 days before the landing. And that mission was different because by then we saw our landing craft, not craft, but all the Navy ships on both sides, battleships and destroyers and cruisers, and they were shelling that. And we'd see the shelling, and what an impressive thing that was, because you'd see this. They'd be firing broadsides, and from our battleships. I think the Missouri was a part of that effort. And when they fire a broadside, there is just a huge, with 3 guns or 6 or whatever it is on there. They're 16-inch guns.
Yeah, they say the whole ship rocks when they fire.
And you see this huge flame flash of orange, and you know something major is happening. And they were shelling that, and they did it for several days before. And how anyone could survive on the island, and 20,000 Japanese did survive. I don't know how many were killed, but it took us it took the Marines 34 days
right.
to secure that island. And then we had 19,000, and history shows it, we had 19,000 casualties, which didn't mean 10, we had 68,000 men killed, but between the casualties of 19,000 and the 6,000, we're up over 24, 25,000. We suffered greater than the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, we didn't even know this until after we got back home. And now that I'm reading, I've read more about this now, and I find out more and later in life than I did that I knew. All I know, we were doing the job. We weren't there on the island only but a few days when one of our planes in our squadron was hit by anti-aircraft, and he made it to within 2 or 3 miles of our, but because of his lack of short gasoline, losing an engine, he crashed just offshore from Saipan, and we were alerted to it right away. And went there. I think there was either 2 or 3 men that were killed. I'm not sure about the number. It was Fagan's crew. The pilot was named Fagan. He lived. And we went to the funeral services, which was in a tent. And we attended services. I happened to be Roman Catholic, and there were Catholic services that were held. And we were sitting, our seats were on metal containers. They were parts of bombs. And I can't, how I describe, all I know is that there weren't real chairs or anything of that nature. You're sitting close to the ground. And the realization comes to you at that time that this is what you're there for. And then many question marks go up in your mind. But one of the things that question mark about how you're going to make it and so on. But we were all invincible at 19 or 20 years old. It's just like taking a car out today. Anyone that takes a car out today, they never think that they might get killed if they go too fast, and a lot of them do.
Let alone motorcycles.
Or a motorcycle, and that's
right.
It's a terrible feeling. But at that time we didn't have the feeling. We somehow, in our own way, thought we would survive, and most of the time you do survive, and that reinforces that feeling until you get older.
Right.
And then when you get older, that feeling isn't as strong anymore. I continued on.
Well, you said after your, I know prior to the interview you had mentioned that after the 7th mission in Iwo Jima, they had sent you back to Hawaii, and you had no idea what was.
We didn't have the slightest idea. We had to fly back. We flew back, which was the easy way to go. All the ground crew, they moved the whole group. We flew one airplane, and there was probably, for the 27th Squadron, so there, if you had an average of 17 planes or something of that kind, then you might have 60, 70 planes coming back. We didn't all come back together.
Right.
But we were back to Oahu, and in order to fly there, you don't know the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. But from Saipan, the first stopping place was Kwajalein, and that had already been taken. That's sort of due east of Saipan, and that was 1,200 miles. Then there was another island of Johnston, which was another 600 miles, and then another 600 miles to from Johnson to Oahu, and wait a minute, 1,200, and then 1,200 to Kwajalein, another 1,200 to Johnston, another 600. So we're talking about 3,000 miles of ocean between Saipan and the Hawaiian Islands. So when somebody says they've been out in the Pacific and they've only gone to Hawaii, that's not out in the Pacific.
Right.
You've only seen a little part of it.
Maybe if they went to Midway or someplace.
And then the realization is how the war in the Pacific had, which was a Navy war, and how well we were able to do in the time. And yet, during those early days of Guadalcanal, and as we said earlier, we had a rough time beating the Japanese. They were a formidable opponent, as were the Germans. I'm not trying to draw any comparison. They were formidable, but they didn't win a single major effort on our part, even though the papers and so on, it didn't appear that we were making headway, but there was always a wonder, were we ever going to win? And I know in the days that we got back to Oahu, we brought those airplanes back. They came and set up a new, we got all new B-24Ms for the whole group, and everyone that had less than 10 missions was the nucleus of that effort. And they then sent over more crews to man the other planes, so to bring it up to strength, to have the same, somewhere around the, whatever that fifth, seventh, there was no magic number, but a squadron was always somewhere. They could have had as many 20 planes, but you could never put 20 planes up in the air per squadron. We were there doing training regularly from that time. It was late February of '45 until after the war ended. And as I said earlier, the war ended with the dropping of the bomb first on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. And even though that happened in August, I looked at my Form 5 records. We were still flying up through January
46.
Of 46. I came home in early March of 46, and it's been only a month since I had flown, and it wasn't missions. We did a number of sea search missions when a plane would go down, and those missions without flying is difficult. We were flying and looking for, in one particular case from Kwajalein, that was in early March. We were looking for a general, 3-star general, who went down in a plane, and they had this, they exercised this big search because he had knowledge of what our plans were for the invasion of Japan. Now that was before the bombs were dropped. And no one wanted him to get into the hands of the Japanese. So this was off of Kwajalein. So they sent us back to Kwajalein after we'd just been there, been in the islands. And that was 600, that was 1,800 miles. And then we went out for searching for him. We would search, they would send planes out about a mile apart, and there might be 8 or 10 planes. So we were searching a 10-mile stretch of ocean, and we'd go out, and some of those missions were 11 and 11 and a half hours, and we were flying at 500 feet.
I'm guessing he was never found, the plane
No,
was never found?
Never did. Did that a number of days, and that was tough. It was difficult. No one was shooting at you, but the feeling that you're flying and looking for something in the water, and occasionally your eyes would play tricks on you,
Mm-hmm.
or your mind was playing tricks. You'd see waves and so
Right.
on. The instructions were we had what they called drift signals. It was a wooden signal that had a little explosive charge in it, and you just toss it out, either out the bottom hatch, whenever you happen to see something that you thought, and you didn't have to ask permission. If you saw something, you just threw one out
Right.
as soon as you can. That way, when it hit the water, there would be a smoke signal, and then you would go into what is called a square search. You tell the pilot, and then you would go in and he'd see the smoke in the water, and then you would go into a square search. And the way you would search the ocean, you just wouldn't circle around, but you would say you start with one heading on a north heading, and you'd fly for 30 seconds. Then you'd go to an east. You'd go to an east heading
Mm-hmm.
for another 30 seconds. Then you'd go to a south heading, or south
Right.
heading, and
And
you
then
go for
west.
45 seconds. So each time you'd increase it. So it's a
Right.
square search. So you're searching, and you're doing it by the compass. So you can search a rather large area in a short time. But when I say a short time, it's not unusual to have it 7 or 8 minutes, but you could search it. But you'd see constantly. You see the. Oh dear. Well, we were talking about the square search when you're searching for an aircraft or anything down in the water. And we found out things very, very tiring, and flying at 500 feet above the water for 11 and 11 and a half hours is you've done a day's work after you come back. We never found the general that went down, nor any evidence of where he went down, but we searched a lot. And it wasn't just our aircraft. There was perhaps 10 or 12 other aircraft that were
Mm-hmm.
flying like we were. There was just one other. Then we went back to Oahu, and I might just add something that I haven't mentioned at all. There was a white Eskimo Spitz dog that was owned by a Navy nurse on Saipan, and she was on a C-54 bringing wounded back or to the hospital, and sometimes to Oahu, sometimes to the States. She had the dog. She gave this dog in care to an intelligence officer in our group, Captain Stevens, and when she didn't know, this was just before, she was on a flight just before D-Day on Iwo Jima. No one knew what was going to happen to
Right.
the bomb group and so on. Well, when we were ordered back, he was going to go back. He had to go because he had a desk job. He was an intelligence officer, and he had the dog in his care. So he thought the only thing, he's going to be going to Hawaii, he's going to get that word to her, but how's he going to get the dog to Hawaii? So he came to me and asked if we would carry the dog on our plane. No one would, there's no customs, and no one would question me. I mean, question a pilot on a B-20,
Right.
B-24, even though it was 3,000 miles. So we took the dog back. Well, we no sooner got to Oahu, and then we had this plane that we had to go down and search, and the ground people were on board ship coming, and that thing was going to take a month to get to Oahu.
Right.
And so we didn't have, we didn't know anyone there to leave the dog with, so we took the dog to Kwajalein with us. We have pictures, and the dog was was a female anyway, but it was a very good dog and very intelligent, and we all loved the dog, and it was a handsome dog. So the dog, we didn't take her on every search. we somehow rigged it with somebody that wasn't searching that day. We left the dog and so on. But the point of the story was then the dog kept on coming back, and then went to Oahu with us. We then returned to Captain Stevens. He never got in touch. He never could find the nurse, etc. And the dog was in our care. I ended up, when the war was over and so on, the dog came back to our crew. Nobody wanted the dog. They couldn't take it.
Right.
I had the dog shipped from Oahu, Railway Express, which was that was at that time.
Right.
And I had it shipped to my house at 139 Prospect Street, and had that dog. My mother took a liking to the dog, and we had a mishap one 4th of July when the dog ran off. It was loud noises and so on. We lost it for a week, and ironically, I wasn't living in this section of town. I put an ad in the paper, a story, actually in the story, and it was found at the end of this street. And that's 2 miles from my mother's house.
Wow.
And a week later, so it was happy ending, and that was the dog story. And I tell that story to many of the kids. One of the other searches that we went on, and it was just before the end of the war, and we were going west toward the United States, east toward the United States from Oahu, and the word came back, there's a ship that's shooting at us, and the ship, we didn't know what it was, and why would they be shooting at us? And the war wasn't over,
Right.
so it must be Japanese. We weren't armed. We didn't have anything in our guns, or were we carrying, because we were on a search mission.
Right.
And we were so far away from Japan, nobody knew. They said it wasn't, we didn't think it, but who else would be shooting at us but a Japanese? This I didn't learn. We were briefed, or not briefed, but we were interrogated after the mission, and my bombardier was the one that he drew a picture of what he thought was shooting at us, and the intelligence officer scoffed at it, and he asked, were you sure that they were shooting, or was it a bunch of porpoises that were jumping out of the water?
Right.
And that annoyed him to a degree, because he knew what he saw, and it was corroborated by a couple of our crew members. Believe it or not, in November of 2006, our bombardier saw in some publication this Japanese submarine, which was 60% longer than any submarine we had or any other country. It actually had a launch. It was able to launch planes that were disassembled, and they could assemble them in a matter of 8 or 10 minutes, or some such thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, he said, I think that's what we saw. And knowing their intelligence, we didn't know the Japanese had anything this big, and so on, and I didn't know this until 3 years ago.
Wow.
But I thought it'd make it interesting.
That is amazing. I'd never heard of that either.
And he mailed this to me, and it's interesting. If you want to take that, I don't mind your taking that and taking information on that.
Definitely.
But I came back to the service. I never got out of the service. I stayed in the Air Corps Reserve. At that time it was Army, and I stayed in until they transferred me to the retired reserve, and that was after 27 years of commissioned service, and I think that was in 1971. 1972.
And I believe you said you were a lieutenant colonel at that time.
And I ended up as a lieutenant colonel, and after I got out of the service, I went back to my job to a job at Peckstone Wilcox. I attended Central Connecticut evenings. I met a nurse-to-be, Ruth Stevens was her maiden name, from Meriden. And she was I met her in in February of 1947. That was just a year after I'd gotten out of the service.
Now, did you attend Central on the GI Bill?
I attended Central
Okay.
GI Bill. She and we were going there nights together. She was going to some of the classes that she ought to have. She became an RN in, I think she got her, she did the test and all a little later in 47.
Mm-hmm.
And we were married in November of 51. But I'm happy to be able to do this because with my children have never known the complete story.
Mm-hmm.
And while this is a complete story, about as complete as you can make it, there's a lot of details that.
Sure. Okay, we had another unexpected break, a phone break, but I just wanted to ask Walter if you had anything else that you've certainly given me plenty of information about your military history, family history, very compelling. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we conclude?
Well, nothing. We've had some conversation before this and so on, and I think that somewhere you look at yourself, your own life, and what brought you to this stage in your life, and what your thinking is, and if I think that the strongest belief of religion and what it can hold for you, and those aren't the right words to use,
Mm-hmm.
but it's lacking in so many places in our society today, and I don't particularly go for Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation, but it was a generation that was far from perfect. I was part of that, and I know that living with the young folks and so on, young guys and so on, and I know how they thought. Yet they came home and they raised families with values, and I guess I know that we're not all perfect, never will be, but that doesn't mean we can't do our roles in life, bring up our children as they should be brought up, so that they can do the same, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And we're never convinced that we've done all that we should or exactly the way we should, but we're trying, and I think that makes a difference when you're trying every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes even when I'm reminded by my daughter, Dad, I'm an adult and I can make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
and you never lose that role as a parent. But at any rate, I'm glad that I have this message to give to my children. Mm-hmm. Again.
Well,
so it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure as well, and it's been an honor to speak with you, and I thank you very much for the time that you've taken to do this. And as I said, this becomes a permanent record, so your story becomes a valuable part of all the stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you.